Nobody on Flight 2847 knew the quiet black woman in 23C was a legendary fighter pilot, until catastrophic failure killed the captain and F-22s scrambled. When co-pilots radioed Falcon Echo, passengers realized the overlooked stranger they'd ignored was the only reason they'd live to see tomorrow. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. Maya Richardson sat in the middle seat, wearing jeans and a simple cardigan, her hair pulled back in a neat bun. She looked ordinary. Unremarkable. The flight attendant had served the businessman in 23B first, then the mother across the aisle, before finally turning to Maya with a practiced smile. Maya ordered ginger ale, said thank you softly, and returned to her paperback novel. She was invisible, exactly as she preferred. What none of them knew was that the woman they overlooked had once been Captain Maya Falcon Echo Richardson, one of the most decorated fighter pilots in United States Air Force history. Her call sign was a legend whispered in ready rooms across the world. Falcon Echo had flown combat missions over 3 conflict zones, achieved 7 confirmed air-to-air kills, making her one of only 3 American female combat aces, and once executed a rescue mission so dangerous it earned her a Silver Star. She had logged over 3,000 hours in F-22 Raptors, F-35 Lightning IIs, and F-16 Fighting Falcons. But here, 37,000 feet above Montana, she was just Maya. Anonymous and unremarkable. The businessman beside her barely acknowledged her when he squeezed past to claim the aisle seat. He opened his laptop immediately and began typing emails. Maya didn't mind. Anonymity was comfortable after 23 years of being Captain Richardson, of carrying the weight of that call sign. She had retired 3 years ago, exhausted after a brutal deployment that cost her 3 friends. Now she consulted for aerospace companies and occasionally gave lectures at military academies. Mostly, she enjoyed the quiet of civilian life. 2 hours into the flight, somewhere over the Dakotas, Maya's trained ear caught a subtle change in engine tone. Her hand stopped mid-turn of a page. She felt the shift in vibration through the cabin, the barely noticeable change in the aircraft's attitude. She glanced out the window, noting the irregular contrail pattern, then looked toward the cabin crew. None of them had noticed anything. Passengers around her continued reading, sleeping, watching movies, unaware of the wrongness that had entered their flight. The captain's voice came over the speakers 30 seconds later, steady but carrying controlled concern. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Mitchell. We've experienced a minor technical issue with our number 2 engine. As a precaution, we're shutting it down and diverting to Minneapolis-St. Paul. We'll be landing in approximately 40 minutes. Maya had heard enough emergency communications to read between the words. Minor technical issue meant something serious. Shutting down an engine wasn't casual. Diverting meant the situation was dangerous enough that continuing wasn't acceptable. The businessman looked up with mild annoyance, already checking his phone. The young mother gathered her toddler closer. Maya remained still, her gaze moving to the window, calculating their position, altitude, and descent rate with automatic precision. They were over flat terrain, weather was clear, Minneapolis had excellent emergency response, the diversion made sense. But something in the captain's voice told her this wasn't as routine as he wanted passengers to believe. The aircraft began descending. Flight attendants moved through the cabin faster than normal, collecting trays and ensuring seats were upright. Maya caught the eye of the senior flight attendant and saw recognition there, not of who Maya was, but of a passenger who wasn't panicking. Then everything changed in 3 seconds. The aircraft lurched violently left, nose dropping sharply. The horrifying sound of tearing metal screamed through the cabin as the entire fuselage shuddered. Unsecured items went flying. Passengers not properly restrained slammed against their seatbelts. Maya's combat reflexes took over, her hands braced against the seat ahead, her core muscles engaged to stabilize her body, her mind instantly analyzing, catastrophic structural failure, severe asymmetric thrust, possible control surface damage, aircraft in uncontrolled descent. Oxygen masks dropped from overhead. Passengers screamed as the aircraft continued its sickening plunge, the angle increasing, the horrifying sensation of falling replacing normal flight. The captain's voice returned, no professional calm this time, just raw urgency. Brace, brace, brace. Flight attendants, take your seats immediately. Maya's hands secured her oxygen mask with motions burned into muscle memory, then returned to brace position. But her mind raced through implications. Engine failure plus structural damage plus uncontrolled descent meant the pilots faced a cascade failure, multiple systems compromised simultaneously. She felt the aircraft struggle through every vibration, read the pilot's desperate attempts to regain control in each shudder. Her assessment was grim: they were in serious trouble. The aircraft leveled momentarily as the pilots fought to arrest the descent, but Maya felt immediately that something was fundamentally wrong. The responses were sluggish, delayed. The aircraft was wallowing rather than flying cleanly. Hydraulic failure, she diagnosed instantly. On a Boeing 767, that meant the pilots were losing their ability to command the aircraft through normal means. They'd be down to backup systems, and managing an aircraft this size on backups with structural damage and one engine was a task that pushed even experienced pilots to their absolute limits. 25,000 feet and descending. Maya's eyes went to the window, tracking altitude by visual reference, estimating descent rate, calculating time before terrain became a factor. Her mind automatically identified emergency landing sites. That highway looked straight, that field appeared clear, even as she knew the pilots would focus on reaching Minneapolis with its emergency equipment and trained responders. The businessman beside her was praying, hands clasped white-knuckled. The young mother curved protectively around her toddler. Throughout the cabin, 247 people faced their mortality. Maya felt the familiar cold clarity settle over her, the combat mindset that had kept her alive through 7 dogfights and dozens of missile engagements. She'd faced this before, when fuel was critical and systems were damaged and the margin between survival and death measured in seconds. The cockpit door opened, a violation of security protocols that told Maya how desperate the situation had become. The senior flight attendant stumbled forward through the tilted cabin. Maya watched her disappear into the cockpit. 30 seconds later, the speakers crackled with a voice Maya hadn't heard before, younger than the captain's, stressed to breaking. Is there anyone aboard with military or professional aviation experience? If you are a pilot, please identify yourself immediately. We need assistance in the cockpit. The co-pilot's voice. And the fact that he was making this announcement while the captain remained silent meant Captain Mitchell was either unconscious, dead, or so overwhelmed he couldn't spare attention for communications. Maya's hand was on her seatbelt before conscious thought. 23 years of training and instinct overrode her desire for anonymity. When an aircraft full of people is falling and the pilots call for help, legends like Falcon echo don't remain seated. She was up and moving forward as passengers turned to stare. The senior flight attendant emerged from the cockpit, eyes scanning desperately, and stopped when she saw Maya approaching with unmistakable command presence. I'm a pilot, Maya said, her voice carrying quiet authority. 23 years Air Force, fighter pilot, 3,000 hours in tactical aircraft. What's the situation? The flight attendant's relief was immediate, though confusion crossed her face. How could this overlooked black woman in civilian clothes be what she claimed? Maya didn't wait for questions, just moved past toward the cockpit. The cockpit was controlled chaos. Captain Mitchell slumped unconscious in the left seat, blood running down his face from a gash on his forehead. The co-pilot, First Officer James Chen, was in the right seat, both hands on controls, fighting the aircraft with everything he had, sweat streaming down his face, eyes wide with fear. The instrument panel showed cascading failures, hydraulic warnings, flight control alerts, engine parameters showing number 2 at 0 and number 1 struggling. The display showed 18,000 feet and dropping at 1,200 feet per minute, airspeed bleeding off, heading wandering. Thank God, Chen gasped. Can you fly? Maya was already sliding into the captain's seat, hands going to controls with automatic precision. Yes, she said, voice steady as stone. Talk to me. What happened? Chen kept his hands on controls as Maya took the aircraft. Bird strike, massive one, went through the number 2 engine into the left wing. We took damage to wing structure and maybe fuel tanks. Lost number 2 immediately, started losing hydraulic pressure in 2 systems, then something failed completely and we lost half our flight controls. Captain hit his head during the impact, been unconscious for 3 minutes. I can't hold her alone, the controls are too unresponsive, and his voice broke. I've got 800 hours total time. I've never dealt with anything like this. Maya's hands moved across the controls, feeling the aircraft's responses, reading the degraded flight characteristics. Severe hydraulic damage, definitely, with control response reduced to maybe 40%. The aircraft was wallowing, and she could feel asymmetric drag from the damaged wing creating constant left roll tendency that required continuous right input to counter. 15,000 feet now, Minneapolis 40 miles away, and with their current descent rate, reaching the airport would require every bit of skill she possessed. Okay, James, she said, using his first name to establish rapport, you're going to stay on controls with me. We'll fly this together, combined inputs, because you're right, one person can't generate enough control authority. Have you declared an emergency? Yes, ma'am, Chen said, some panic receding as he recognized competence beside him. Minneapolis approach is clearing the airport, emergency equipment is standing by. Maya nodded, scanning instruments, building her mental model of what this damaged aircraft could do. What's our fuel state? Chen checked gauges. 22,000 pounds remaining, but I think we're leaking from the left wing. The decrease rate is faster than consumption alone. That complicated things, leaking fuel meant fire risk, meant they were racing time before the imbalance affected handling further. They had one chance to get this right. Minneapolis approach, Atlantic 2847 heavy, Maya transmitted, her voice carrying clipped military precision. We have experienced catastrophic bird strike resulting in multiple system failures and control degradation. Single engine operations, severe hydraulic loss, captain incapacitated. Request vectors for longest available runway with maximum emergency equipment. Be advised we are leaking fuel and may have structural damage. This will be a one-attempt approach, we do not have control authority for a go-around. The controller responded immediately, Atlantic 2847 heavy, Minneapolis copies all. Cleared direct Minneapolis, expect runway 12L, 11,000 feet available. Emergency equipment is mobilizing. Descend and maintain 8,000, reduce speed as able. Say souls on board and fuel remaining. 253 souls on board, Maya responded, hands making constant small adjustments as she and Chen fought to maintain stable flight, fuel approximately 22,000 pounds but decreasing due to suspected leak. We will need immediate assistance upon landing, possible structural fire risk. She released the transmit button and turned to Chen. Here's what we're going to do. We'll fly a continuous descent approach, no level-offs, because every time we try to arrest descent and stabilize, we burn energy and fuel we can't afford. I'll manage big control inputs and overall flight path, you'll help with continuous corrections. When I say pull, you pull with me. When I say relax, you relax pressure. We're going to be a single pilot with 4 hands, understand? Chen nodded, terror in his eyes replaced by focus. Yes, ma'am. But who are you? How do you know how to do this? Maya allowed the smallest smile. My name is Maya Richardson. I used to fly fighters. Right now, that's all that matters. Concentrate on your instruments, call out any system changes, and stay with me on controls. She didn't mention her call sign, didn't mention her combat record, didn't mention landing an F-22 with no hydraulics in a feat still discussed in training. This wasn't about ego. This was about getting 253 people on the ground alive. They descended through 12,000 feet, Minneapolis suburbs visible ahead, the airport's runway layout becoming clear. Maya flew with intense concentration, feeling every nuance of damaged responses, learning new characteristics in real time, building the mental model she'd need for landing. The aircraft wanted to oscillate, the damaged wing creating yaw she had to counter constantly. Flight controls responded with delay that felt like moving through mud, requiring her to anticipate corrections seconds before they became apparent. And underlying everything was asymmetric thrust from the single engine, creating constant left yaw tendency that required continuous right rudder pressure, already making her leg ache. Atlantic 2847 Heavy, Minneapolis approach, the radio crackled. Be advised, we have two F-22 Raptors from Minnesota Air National Guard being scrambled to provide visual escort and communications relay. They'll be with you in approximately 7 minutes. Maya felt shock run through her at the mention of F-22s. Her aircraft. Her squadron's aircraft. Raptors scrambled to escort crippled airliners was standard procedure for certain emergencies, providing trained military eyes to assess damage and relay information. But the timing felt symbolic, as if the universe had decided that if Falcon Echo was coming out of retirement to save an airliner, she should have Raptors flying beside her. 8,000 feet, speed decreasing to 200 knots as Maya and Chen managed the delicate balance between maintaining control and not overstressing the damaged airframe. The passengers behind them had no idea the woman they'd overlooked was literally holding their lives in her hands. The senior flight attendant stood in the doorway, face pale but composed, watching these two pilots, one young and terrified but determined, one calm with unshakable confidence, work together. "Should I tell the passengers anything?" she asked quietly. Maya shook her head without taking eyes from instruments. "Tell them we're working the problem and we're going to get them down safely. Tell them to stay in brace position until we're stopped. And tell them they have two pilots who are very good at their jobs and won't quit until everyone is safe." 6,000 feet, 4 miles from airport, runway visible ahead like promised sanctuary. Maya ran landing calculations with practiced speed. They were high and fast, but intentionally, she didn't trust the aircraft's ability to respond if they got slow and needed power. She'd plan a long landing, use every foot of runway, accept higher touchdown speed for maintaining control authority. The alternative, trying for perfect touchdown zone, risked stalling or losing control in final seconds. Atlantic 2847 Heavy, Raptor 1 flight of 2 checking in, a new voice came over radio, young and confident. "We have you visual at your 7 o'clock, 2 miles. We're moving in for close assessment. Be advised our commander is monitoring and has authorized us to provide whatever assistance you need." Maya keyed the radio. "Raptor flight, Atlantic 2847 copies. Appreciate the assistance. Primary damage is number 2 engine and left wing leading edge. We've lost significant hydraulic pressure with degraded flight controls. Single engine on number 1. Captain incapacitated, first officer and assisting pilot flying together." The two F-22 Raptors swept up alongside the airliner, one on each wing, holding perfect formation as they closed for inspection. Inside those cockpits were pilots Maya had probably trained, young aviators who'd studied tactics she'd pioneered. The lead Raptor pilot came back on radio, voice tighter as he assessed damage. "Atlantic 2847, Raptor 1 confirms significant structural damage to left wing leading edge, approximately 15 feet of panel missing or deformed. Your number 2 engine shows catastrophic failure with visible impact damage. We're also seeing what appears to be fuel streaming from your left wing outboard section." That confirmed Maya's suspicions, definitely leaking fuel, which meant their time was even more limited. 4,000 feet, 3 miles from runway, approach path stabilizing as Maya and Chen worked together with increasing effectiveness as they learned to anticipate each other's inputs. The aircraft was still wallowing, still fighting, but they were winning 1 second at a time, forcing this damaged giant toward the runway through skill and determination. Maya's mind was completely focused, operating in that state of heightened awareness combat pilots call being in the zone, where time seems to slow, where every input feels perfectly clear, where the boundary between pilot and aircraft dissolves. Raptor 1, Atlantic 2847, Maya transmitted, "We're going to need you to maintain visual escort through touchdown and be prepared for possible fire response if we leak fuel on runway during landing roll. Also, get your squadron commander on frequency. I may need authorization to use non-standard landing techniques if our control situation degrades further." Brief pause, then the Raptor pilot responded with curiosity clear, "Atlantic 2847, Raptor 1 copies. Our commander is standing by. Can you clarify your experience level? You're sounding pretty tactical for an airline pilot, if you don't mind me saying." Maya smiled grimly, hands never stopping their constant corrections. This was the moment her anonymity was going to end, when Falcon Echo would come out of retirement whether she wanted to or not. Because if they needed emergency authorization, the fighter wing commander needed to know who was asking, needed to understand the voice belonged to someone who could be trusted. Raptor Flight, Atlantic 2847, this is Captain Maya Richardson, United States Air Force retired, 3,000 hours in tactical aircraft including F-22s. I'm an assisting pilot helping the first officer manage this emergency. The frequency went silent for several heartbeats. Maya could imagine the reaction in Raptor cockpits, the sudden recognition of that name, the shock of understanding who was flying that crippled airliner. Then the lead pilot's voice came back, filled with awe and reverence, "Atlantic 2847. Ma'am, are you call sign Falcon Echo?" The question hung in the air, broadcast not just to the Raptors but to Minneapolis Approach, to Emergency Operations Center, to every frequency monitoring this crisis. And in the cabin behind them, broadcast over the PA system because Chen hadn't switched off the cockpit microphone, that question reached 253 passengers who'd overlooked Maya Richardson all flight. "Affirmative, Raptor Flight," Maya said quietly, voice steady as she fought the aircraft through 3,000 feet. "This is Falcon Echo. And I need you focused on your job, not my call sign. We've got about 90 seconds to touchdown, and I need perfect coordination from here on out." But even as she said it, she heard the change in the young fighter pilot's voice, the sudden snap of professional focus from understanding he was working with a legend. "Yes, ma'am, Raptor Flight is fully focused. Falcon Echo, be advised our commander sends his regards and says whatever you need, you've got it. He says to tell you he flew your wing at Red Flag in 2019 and you're the best pilot he's ever seen. We've got your back. 2,000 feet, 2 miles from runway, airport filling the windscreen, emergency vehicles visible along runway edges like toys, their flashing lights tiny pinpricks." Maya began configuring for landing, calling for Chen to extend flaps incrementally, feeling the aircraft's response to each change, managing delicate balance between drag and lift. Control responses were getting worse as they slowed, degraded hydraulics providing less authority as airspeed decreased. The final approach would require perfect timing. Too fast and they'd float and potentially overrun even 11,000 feet. Too slow and they'd lose control and drop. The margin between those extremes was narrow, but that's what made her Falcon Echo, the ability to thread impossible needles when lives depended on it. In the cabin, passengers heard that radio transmission, heard F-22 pilots call the black woman from seat 23C by a call sign that clearly meant something extraordinary, heard the reverence when he said, "Falcon Echo," and every head turned toward the cockpit with sudden understanding. The businessman from 23B sat frozen, his earlier dismissiveness transformed into awed understanding that the woman he'd barely acknowledged was now their only hope. The young mother clutched her toddler tighter, whispering prayers of thanks for whatever cosmic chance had put this particular passenger on this particular flight. Throughout the cabin, fear remained but was joined by hope, by sudden belief that maybe they were going to survive because someone legendary was flying their aircraft. 1,000 feet, 1 mile from runway, landing gear extending with hydraulic groans, 3 green lights confirming all gear down appearing on the panel with delayed timing that suggested the extension mechanism barely had enough hydraulic pressure. Chen was calling out altitudes and airspeeds with mechanical precision, his fear now channeled into purpose, into being the best co-pilot he could be. Maya flew with both hands on the yoke, inputs constant and measured, feeling the aircraft through her hands like a surgeon feeling a pulse, reading every nuance of its damaged condition. Raptor Flight, Falcon Echo, Maya transmitted, voice carrying the same calm she'd used in combat. I'm seeing stronger crosswind than I'd like in my current control state. Can you give me real-time wind calls for the last quarter mile? The lead Raptor pilot responded immediately, his aircraft perfectly positioned. Roger, Falcon Echo, we've got you covered. Current winds on surface are 200 at 15 gusting to 22 knots. That's putting you about 30 degrees off your nose, left crosswind component approximately 8 knots. Maya processed the information instantly, not terrible, but not great given limited control authority. She'd need to carry slight wing low correction all the way to touchdown to prevent drift. 500 feet, half a mile, runway threshold approaching with inexorable speed. Maya made final approach power adjustments, calling for Chen to reduce thrust slightly, feeling the aircraft settle into the descent profile she'd established. Her eyes flicked between instruments and windscreen view, building that critical three-dimensional picture where abstract instrument data and concrete visual information merge into single intuitive understanding. The Raptor pilots held formation, professional guardians watching over this crippled giant. 200 feet, and Maya could see individual emergency vehicles now, foam trucks positioned along runway ready to respond if fire erupted, ambulances and fire equipment staged for mass casualty response. The visual reminder of what failure would mean, 253 dead, families destroyed, tried to intrude on her focus, but she pushed it away with practiced mental discipline. Fear and doubt were luxuries she couldn't afford in the next 30 seconds. There was only the aircraft, only the controls, only the runway approaching at 140 knots. 100 feet, and she could feel the aircraft settling, damaged wing wanting to drop, asymmetric thrust trying to push the nose left. Maya and Chen applied coordinated control inputs, for hands on two yokes, using combined strength to generate control authority needed to maintain wings level and centered on runway centerline. Crosswind pushed against them, trying to drift them left, and Maya compensated with slight right wing low attitude, perfect crosswind correction, letting the upwind wing drop slightly while maintaining runway alignment with rudder. 50 feet, 30 feet, and Maya pulled power to idle, flaring the aircraft with careful timing that meant the difference between controlled landing and disaster. She felt Chen move with her on controls, his inputs matching hers, their coordination perfected through these desperate minutes. The main gear touched down with solid thump at approximately 130 knots. Maya immediately deployed spoilers and thrust reversers on the single operating engine, brake applications gentle at first then progressive as she felt response, anti-skid system working overtime to prevent lockup. The aircraft decelerated down the runway, eating concrete at alarming rate, the single thrust reverser creating asymmetric deceleration that wanted to turn them left, and Maya fought it with rudder and differential braking, keeping them centered, keeping them straight, burning off speed with every passing second. 5,000 feet of runway gone, 6,000, 7,000, and their speed dropped through 80 knots, 60 knots, 40 knots, and finally, with 3,000 feet of runway remaining, Atlantic Airways Flight 2847 rolled to complete stop, safe on the ground, all 253 souls aboard alive and uninjured. Emergency vehicles converged immediately, foam trucks spraying the leaking wing with fire-suppressing foam as crews worked to secure the aircraft. Maya sat back in her seat, hands trembling slightly with aftereffects of sustained adrenaline, and turned to look at Chen, who was staring at her with undisguised awe. "You just saved all our lives," he said, voice breaking with emotion. I've never seen anything like that. How did you stay so calm?" Maya managed a tired smile, her body suddenly feeling every one of her 46 years. 23 years of practice, James. And you did beautifully. You kept your head, you followed instructions, you worked with me instead of against me. Most pilots with your experience level would have panicked, but you didn't. You should be proud. The radio crackled one final time, and the lead Raptor pilot's voice came through, carrying emotions that military professionalism could barely contain. "Falcon Echo, Raptor Flight. That was the most incredible piece of flying we've ever witnessed. Ma'am, it's been the honor of our careers to fly with you today. Welcome back to the sky." Maya keyed the mic for the last time, her legendary call sign echoing across the frequency. "Thank you, Raptor Flight. Clear skies and tailwinds, gentlemen. Falcon Echo is RTB. Return to base," the traditional military farewell that carried new meaning now, because after 3 years of retirement, she'd just been reminded why she'd loved flying in the first place. Captain Mitchell stirred in the left seat, groaning as consciousness returned, hand going to the bandage on his forehead. Maya helped stabilize him as paramedics entered the cockpit. "Easy, Captain," Maya said gently. "You're on the ground in Minneapolis. Your first officer and I brought her in safe." Mitchell's eyes focused on her with difficulty. "Who are you?" he asked, genuine bewilderment evident. Before Maya could answer, Chen spoke up, voice filled with wonder. "Sir, this is Captain Maya Richardson. She's Falcon Echo." "The Falcon Echo. She was a passenger on our flight." Mitchell's eyes went wide despite his obvious concussion. "Falcon Echo? The fighter pilot? You were just sitting back in coach." Maya shrugged, helping paramedics ease him from seat onto stretcher. "Seat 23C. Middle seat." The ginger ale was decent. The absurdity of the statement, legendary combat pilot commenting on beverage service after saving an airliner, broke the tension, and Chen actually laughed, the sound carrying the edge of hysteria that comes when crisis gives way to relief. The senior flight attendant appeared in the doorway again, professional composure finally cracking as tears streamed down her face. "The passengers want to thank you," she said to Maya. "They're all saying you saved them. They heard the F-22 pilots calling you Falcon Echo, and now everyone knows who you are." Maya glanced toward the cabin, where she could see passengers standing despite emergency cruise instructions, all of them turned toward the cockpit, waiting. She took a deep breath, smoothing down her civilian clothes, the jeans and cardigan that now seemed impossibly ordinary, and stepped out of the cockpit. The applause started immediately, thunderous in the enclosed space, 253 people expressing gratitude in the only way available. Maya walked through the cabin toward her original seat, and passengers reached out to touch her hand, her shoulder, their faces wet with tears of relief. The businessman from 23B stood as she approached, his earlier dismissiveness completely erased. "Ma'am, I sat next to you for 2 hours and never realized. I'm so sorry I didn't acknowledge you properly. And thank you. Thank you for my life." Maya squeezed his shoulder, seeing in his face awe mixed with gratitude mixed with dawning realization of how close they'd all come to death. The young mother was crying openly, her toddler mercifully asleep in her arms, and she grabbed Maya's hand. "My baby is alive because of you," she whispered. "How can I ever thank you?" Maya crouched down beside her row, meeting her eyes directly. "You thank me by holding her tight and loving her completely, and by remembering that there are people in this world who will risk everything to keep strangers safe. Pass that forward." The mother nodded, unable to speak, and Maya moved on, receiving thanks from dozens of passengers who'd overlooked her completely just hours ago but now recognized her as their salvation. Outside the aircraft, media had already arrived, news helicopters circling overhead, camera crews setting up on the tarmac, because a commercial aviation near-disaster with F-22 involvement and a legendary pilot saving the day was the kind of story that would dominate news cycles for weeks. Maya could see satellite trucks through cabin windows, could imagine headlines already being written, could feel her carefully maintained anonymity evaporating with each passing second. Falcon Echo was back in public consciousness, whether she wanted to be or not. The evacuation proceeded with careful efficiency, emergency slides deployed on the undamaged right side, passengers sliding down to waiting ground crews and being directed toward buses for the terminal. Maya was among the last to leave, waiting to ensure every passenger was safely off before she emerged into the Minnesota afternoon. The moment her feet touched the tarmac, a small delegation approached, airport officials, airline executives, and a 2-star general in Air Force uniform whom Maya recognized immediately as Major General David Thornton, commander of the Minnesota Air National Guard. Thornton saluted sharply, which Maya returned automatically despite her civilian status, muscle memory from 23 years overriding her retirement. "Captain Richardson," he said formally, "on behalf of the United States Air Force and everyone who witnessed what you did today, thank you for demonstrating the finest qualities of military aviation under circumstances that would have defeated lesser pilots." He extended his hand, which Maya shook, noting the firm grip and direct eye contact of a fellow aviator. "My pilots tell me you flew that approach with the precision of a combat mission. They said it was the most professional display of crisis management they've ever observed." Maya felt suddenly exhausted, the adrenaline finally draining away and leaving profound weariness. "General, I did what any pilot would do. I was just fortunate to be in the right place with the right training." Thornton shook his head. "Captain, with respect, that's not accurate. Most pilots would have frozen, would have panicked, would have made fatal mistakes under those conditions. You didn't just fly that aircraft, you mastered it under circumstances that defied mastery. That's why your call sign is legendary, why young pilots study your missions, why Falcon Echo means something in the fighter community. Today you reminded everyone why." The media surged forward then, held back by security but calling questions that carried clearly. "Captain Richardson. Can you tell us what happened? Falcon Echo. How does it feel to save 253 lives? Ma'am. Were you scared?" Maya turned toward the cameras, seeing her reflection in their lenses, this middle-aged black woman in civilian clothes who'd been invisible until crisis demanded the skills that made her invisible no more. She thought about the anonymity she'd cultivated, the quiet retirement she'd enjoyed, the peaceful obscurity that was now impossible to maintain. And she thought about the 253 people walking away from that aircraft, alive because training and skill and experience had intersected with desperate need. She stepped forward, and the cameras pressed closer. "My name is Maya Richardson," she said clearly, voice carrying calm authority. "I was a passenger on Atlantic Airways Flight 2847 when it experienced a catastrophic emergency. The pilots requested assistance from anyone with aviation experience, and I was able to provide that assistance because of training I received during 23 years serving in the United States Air Force. First Officer James Chen deserves tremendous credit for his performance under extraordinary pressure. Captain Mitchell was incapacitated through no fault of his own but had already made excellent decisions that gave us a chance at survival. The F-22 pilots from Minnesota Air National Guard provided critical support. What happened today was teamwork, multiple professionals doing their jobs under impossible circumstances. That's the real story." A reporter called out, "But you're Falcon Echo. You're a legend. How did you stay so calm?" Maya chose her words carefully, aware her response would be replayed countless times, studied by aviation students, analyzed by crisis management experts. "In the military, we train extensively for emergency situations precisely so that when they occur, we can respond with competence rather than panic. Every pilot who flies tactical aircraft practices emergency procedures until they become automatic. Today, that training paid off. But I want to emphasize something important: I was just a passenger until the emergency occurred. The crew and passengers treated me exactly as they should have, as another person traveling on a commercial flight. There was no way anyone could have known I had relevant experience until it was needed. And that's actually a good thing, because it means we live in a world where people are judged by their actions when it matters, not by credentials or reputation they carry around like badges. Today, I was just Maya from seat 23C until the moment I could help. That's exactly how it should be." In the weeks and months that followed, Maya Richardson settled into a new version of retirement, still civilian, still private to the extent possible, but no longer anonymous. She consulted on Air Force training programs, delivered lectures at aviation schools, and served on safety boards investigating complex incidents. Young pilots sought her out for mentorship, combat veterans thanked her for representing their community so well. She maintained relationships with survivors from Flight 2847, attending a reunion 6 months after the incident where 200 people gathered to celebrate life and second chances. First Officer James Chen had been promoted to captain based on his performance during the emergency. The businessman from 23B sent Christmas cards with family photos and notes about how he'd changed his approach to life. The young mother emailed occasionally with pictures of her growing toddler, reminders of why Maya's skills had mattered so profoundly. And sometimes, late at night when she couldn't sleep, Maya would stand at her window and watch aircraft pass overhead, their navigation lights bright against darkness, and she'd think about all the ordinary flights carrying ordinary passengers, most of whom would never experience emergency, never need extraordinary intervention, never know how close to catastrophe routine operations sometimes came. Her call sign remained Falcon Echo, legendary in fighter pilot circles, spoken with reverence by aviators who understood what it represented, not just skill or combat achievements, but a fundamental commitment to excellence that transcended military service. She'd been just a black woman in seat 23C until F-22 pilots called Falcon Echo on the radio, and everyone realized that legends sometimes travel in middle seats, that expertise doesn't always announce itself, that the most remarkable people among us might be the ones we've overlooked completely until the moment their capabilities become essential for survival. Maya Richardson had wanted quiet anonymity in retirement, but she'd been given instead a final mission, demonstrating through actions rather than words that training matters, that preparation saves lives, that we should invest in excellence specifically because we never know when it will be needed, and that we should never assume we understand someone's capabilities based on their appearance or position or the seat they occupy on a commercial flight. Falcon Echo had returned from retirement for one extraordinary mission, and though she'd never seek another emergency, she remained ready, always ready, because that's what legends do, and that's who she'd always been, from the first day she'd earned her wings to this new chapter where her skills served not in combat but in crisis, not over hostile territory but over American heartland, not in a fighter cockpit but in an airliner carrying people home to families and futures that existed because Maya Richardson had been in seat 23C when excellence was needed most. The black woman they'd overlooked had become the hero they'd never forget, and her call sign, Falcon Echo, resonated now not just in military-ready rooms but in commercial aviation schools, in crisis management seminars, and in the grateful memories of survivors who understood that sometimes salvation comes from unexpected sources, wearing civilian clothes, sitting quietly in middle seats, waiting for the moment when legendary skills become essential for life itself.